I'm Andrew Basiago, and this is the Quest for Truth.
And my name is Aaron Moriarity. I will be your moderator, and we're back again. Thank you, Andy, for coming back. And what is the quest today? What is the quest today?
Well, let me just tell you about a rather exciting thing that happened this week. I got a call from a gentleman who has spent 25 years studying the Bible code.
Oh.
And he shared a lot of fascinating information of a general nature with me about the Bible code. But I pretty much fell out of my chair when he also revealed that in a specific chapter of the Bible, my name is listed together with time travel, and he gave me the astronomically impossible likelihood of those occurring just accidentally in the same tight matrix with a skip tracing that really goes to the first five books of the Bible. So what we're going to do in 2 weeks is an episode of The Quest for Truth that'll talk about those discoveries and what they might mean, and what we mean by the Bible code, how it works, where it could have come from, and the fact that this gentleman is from a rather distinguished family in applied quantum physics that connects to other major areas of what we might call parascience. And we're going to be doing a show called Andy, Time Travel, and the Bible Code. So that's set for 2 weeks from tonight, which is August 28th. And I hope we don't laugh too much when I explain why we picked the 28th, but it relates to the astronomically tiny, infinitesimal chance of the odds of my name, the word time travel, appearing together in the same book of what's known as the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So we'll take a look at that on Sunday, August 28th.
Awesome. That sounds really, really interesting. Your name is actually in it now. Maybe you don't want to go into it now, but my mind is already spinning, Andy. So is your name spelled out in a specific area, or do you take like the first letter from this book?
I'm going to explain exactly what's been found.
Okay.
It's essentially the first letter of my first name, A, for Andrew, and my family name, which is really essentially a singular surname in the United States, and I'll explain why. Actually, in the world, it's very uncommon, and it actually incorporates an error that made it more rare than the original name, which was a rare name to begin with. So it's that which seems to identify me, because I'm not even sure I have any surviving, grand uncles or cousins or second cousins whose names start with A and then my surname. So it apparently refers to me, and it is in a kind of a tight matrix with the word time travel. And we're talking about Hebrew, and we're talking about a book that was written over 3,000 years ago. So I'm not bragging. I'm pretty much astonished with what I've been told, and I think it's an interesting study, or case study, if you will, of the ongoing debate over the Bible code, which I think began with the publication of Michael Drosnin's book, The Bible Code, back, about 30, 35 years ago. And there are different software programs, some of them, I believe, available online that you can use to search for stuff like this. But the interesting thing is that this man is a scholar of the finest water in what the Bible code is, where it is in Scripture, the explanations for how it could have gotten there, and the mathematical probability studies that show that it was not accidental. In other words, we could put my name and the word spaghetti, which I like, or pizza, which I love. It's not going to be there. Or we could put my name, first letter, my first name and last name, and we could put New Jersey, which is where I was born, and it won't be there. So in other words, what's really fascinating about what this gentleman has found is that there seems to have been some sort of divine purpose intended all along to involve me, at least in this dimension, at this time and in time space, to be associated with time travel. And I'm not making it up. I don't need the publicity.
Yeah.
I think it's just an amazing example of the fact that we have to take another look at the Bible code and exactly what's going on with it. Because this gentleman was very resolute, very logical. I spent about 3 hours on the phone with him when he called me. And between now and 2 weeks, I'll get his permission to use his name, tell a little bit about him and his rather remarkable family, and just use this as an object lesson in the fact that apparently, as he insists, the Bible code is not an accident and it is not an urban legend. It exists, especially if you know how to use it. One of the advantages is the mastery of Hebrew, because time travel is not in there in English, because the scripture wasn't written in English, right? It was like Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and then from there transliterated to more modern languages like English. So I'm not saying that Basiago is there in a tight matrix with time travel in English, which would be again an example of one of those presentist violations of historiography. It's there in Hebrew. It seems to have been the original intent of whoever was responsible for coding the Bible code into the Bible, that my name be in synchrony with time travel.
Wow. Well, my name is in the Bible too. My first name, Aaron, of course, the brother of Moses.
Yes.
However, I don't think it was really me, but
we'll have him look for Moriarity, Moriarity.
Yeah.
And the Hebrew word for humor or podcaster.
Yeah, humorous podcaster, dad joke of eternity. There we go, something like that. Wow.
So I kind of also see this as an object lesson in the fact that the more people we communicate with, and the more we remain open to people from all over the world, of every belief system, every faith, every language group, every cultural block in the world, the more we begin connecting dots. And that's what I've been doing for over 40 years, since I was like an 18, 19-year-old journalist in Los Angeles. And I even had people say to me, what's the Bible code? And I would say, you never heard of Michael Drosnin's book about the Bible code? It was like on the cover of Time magazine, man. Where have you been? So I was floored when this gentleman told me what I'm going to share in 2 weeks here on the Quest for Truth.
Wow.
I was quite gobsmacked, as they say in the United Kingdom.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but tonight, Aaron, is going to be the first part of a two-part set of broadcasts, The Quest for Truth, entitled The Secret Space Program Rediscovered. Now, as I persuaded former President Barack Hussein Obama to reveal on the Stephen Colbert Show, after I wrote him on, what was that? That was July 28th of 2020. My former fellow astronaut, President Obama, essentially changed his position and admitted for the first time, 10 years after he lied about his service with us, he admitted that there's a secret space program. And then the Israeli general, Haim Ashed, announced that American astronauts are working with ETs on Mars.
Yeah.
And I received about, 250 phone calls after that congratulating me for standing in my truth about the fact that Americans have been on Mars since 1964, and I was going there between 1981 and 1984, as were the four gentlemen I brought forward: William B. Stillings, Bernard Mendez, William Whitecrow, and Dr. Ralph Kennedy Johnston Sr. And that has not really been emphasized very much. I still have people who have followed my work and old friends from UCLA and so forth. They remember Obama's press secretary for his National Security Council, Tommy Vitor, making a joke out of me 12 years ago, but they don't know that 2 years ago, President Obama did a 180-degree turn and acknowledged that there was a secret space program. He just couldn't talk about it. And I have to be honest with you, I'm not really bothered too much by that not completely fulfilling the promise he made to Bernard Mendez and I through an intermediary when he told us that he remembered being in the Project Mars. He remembered me vividly, but his memories of Project Mars were quote-unquote vague and dreamlike, and that he promised he would come forward after being president and admit his involvement in the program. He hasn't done that yet. He still has many, many years to do that, and I'm sure that I will ultimately persuade him to do that. But he has gone more than halfway and acknowledged the existence of the secret space program. So I thought tonight we would talk about the early days of the space program, my early experiences which relate to Mars, and then what was achieved between roughly 2009 and 2014. And then when the literature of the secret space program swung from an unprecedented set of revelations by people who actually were in it to a mix of a few possible claimants, many opportunists, some fantasists, and some, I believe, disinformants. So people basically motivated by commercial, delusional, and disinformational goals. Now, I want to make it clear tonight in discussing that primarily a week from now, that I have decided to no longer name names regarding those that I either believe or don't believe. I think it was made clear, certainly on this program and many others, that when I came forward, I reified the truth value of two individuals who had come forward earlier, Michael C. Ralph and Arthur Neumann, primarily because their descriptions of the aeronautical repositioning chambers, also known as the jump rooms or space elevators, was spot on. I thought, well, how would these gentlemen have known this unless they were using them? It was not public information. In fact, it was deep black secrets, deep black secrecy. And then I brought forward Stillings, Mendez, Whitecrow, and Johnston, and then the great granddaughter of a president, Laura Eisenhower. So that was all going somewhere as a movement with those 8 people. And I'll explain on next week's show how essentially with the false claims of Randy Kramer, which I proved were not only changing, establishing the fact that he wasn't telling the truth, but the original sort of schema of his claims involved taking my experiences and kind of doing a one-upsmanship to impress. And I interviewed Randy, I interviewed his soon-to-be ex-wife, Andrea, and I and others found him lying. Now, I can certainly identify Randy Kramer as one of the non-truth tellers. But I've decided that I don't want to name names and be regarded as somebody knocking down stories. My whole goal to begin with was to share my experiences and to bring forward other truth tellers. So I'm going to continue to focus on that, but I will focus tonight on the early days of the secret space program and what I think was influencing it politically and sort of socially and culturally. And then I'll bring that all the way up to like 2009 with the revelation of those 8 people amounting to an important set of disclosures. Then next week, I will share the 10 to 12 characteristics of those who I am pretty sure for different reasons have been alleging involvement in a secret space program. And that's been kind of meme managed to exist, the secret space program, but it was never called that. And I think most of the people that come after Randy Kramer have not been telling the truth for those different reasons. But in saying that, I want to make it clear that with several of them, I may be wrong. Mm-hmm. I spoke with Penny Bradley a few days ago and was impressed with what she shared. I have friends who insist that Tony Rodriguez is telling the truth. And I look forward to either listening to an audio book or have somebody read his book to me, or read it myself once I get my specialized vision device up and running, the Eschenbach device. So anyway, 2 weeks, Andy, time travel, and the Bible code. But tonight, part 1 of the secret space program, Rediscovered. Now, here's the general scheme. I believe that really since NASA was founded as NARA in 1958, there has been a phenomenon involving space, of course, because we have to remember that when NARA, NASA's original name, when NARA was founded in 1958, the Roswell incident had already happened in July of 1947, and the famous overflight of Washington, D.C. had already happened in July of 1952. And so 6 years later, NARA is founded. And do you remember its primary mission?
No, I don't.
The primary mission of the space agency, given to it by the will of the American people, the Congress as the first branch of the U.S. government among equals, or not equals, but among 3, that the first among a tripartite system of government, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary in that order, as laid out in the Constitution. The primary mission of the U.S. Space Agency was, quote, the expansion of human knowledge of space and the near-Earth environment. Okay? There's a problem, and that is they wanted to do that and fulfill NARA, but they could not reveal to the American people what they were accumulating in their knowledge of visitors from other star systems and other dimensions visiting us. And they had no knowledge who they were, where they were from, or what they wanted, contrary to the claims made by individuals like Alex Collier. So what did they do? They basically created a system of gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. In the first group were sort of scholars and journalists. So I put like a J. Allen Hynek on Project Blue Book as one of these gatekeepers. Because look, remember what Hynek said about Project Blue Book? Oh, but I had to realize that in a small residue of cases, they just couldn't be explained away. But wait a minute. Hynek had to know about Roswell in 1947 and the overflight of Washington, D.C. in 1952. So how could he be talking about, well, I had to believe that in a small residue of cases, we couldn't just explain them away, and it looked like we were possibly being visited by beings from elsewhere. That was gatekeeping. That was using Dr. Hynek as a scholar gatekeeper. Another example, I think, in a more modern instance would be, let's say, Richard Hoagland. When Richard Hoagland was going on coast and over again talking about that NASA meant never a straight answer, but then never really saying a whole lot about what NASA was up to, never really revealing that NASA was founded as a as a military intelligence-driven disinformation program. Did they do an announcement from the Johnson Space Center in Houston and say, let's tell you about Roswell, let's tell you about the overflight of Washington, D.C., let's tell you about the 6 species that are on the moon? No. So I can prove tonight, I will, regarding the sort of the first phase, it's part 1 of the secret space program Rediscovered, that NASA ultimately involved itself as a military intelligence gatekeeper and disinformation racket against me, going back to things they were reversing from my very early days that my father had handled as what? A gatekeeper from the Defense Department who was affiliated with alphabet intelligence agencies like CIA, like DARPA, like DIA, like NSA, but was just a Defense Department engineer with reporting requirements to most branches of the U.S. military and most U.S. agencies, not just intelligence agencies, but all of them, state, defense, EPA, etc. Okay. And so in that sort of first wave of the secret space program, we had scholars like, let's say, Jules Bergman on ABC News when he was showing us blow by blow every last moment of our brave 6 missions to the moon, where 12 Americans walked on the moon between 1968 and 1972. But did Jules Bergman do a show in 1972 saying, my fellow Americans, we're not going back to the moon, and here's why? Because there are as many as 6 extraterrestrial species occupying it? No. So, in other words, Jules Bergman and the rest were gatekeepers that were handling the desire to implement the mandate of Congress, and hence the will of the American people, to expand human knowledge of space and the near-Earth environment, which is why the space agency was created, but also conceal the ET presence in our solar system. And then, at a certain point, just many, many decades later, after I and my fellows came forward and they realized, well, wait a minute, we now have 8 people consisting of 7 people who went to Mars and the great-granddaughter of an esteemed U.S. president, President Eisenhower. What are we going to do? So they started a second phase of gatekeepers, not journalists, not scholars, not your Jules Bergmans, your J. Allen Hynek, your Richard C. Hoaglands, but experiencers. Now, the thrust of that second wave of gatekeeping has been disinformation. I'm not talking about the 8 people who came forward that occasioned that gatekeeping, that second wave of gatekeeping. I'm talking about faux experiencers whose job from the beginning was to spin the facts. So we're really starting tonight in 1958 with the establishment of the U.S. Space Agency. Okay, so what happens 4 years later? 1962. Alternative 3 is produced and broadcast. Many people have contacted me and confronted me on radio about that British production, Alternative 3. It ends with a landing on the Red Planet and the viewing of sort of snake-like predators in the soils of Mars. And I'm often asked, was Alternative 3 a real landing? No, it was not. It was a science fiction production to depict what might happen when we began going out and exploring other planets in our solar system. Did we do so in 1962? As depicted in Alternative 3? No. Alternative 3 was produced by East Anglia TV in the United Kingdom. I know that because, of course, as a graduate of the University of Cambridge, that is East Anglia. In fact, I wouldn't even be surprised if aerospace graduates from Cambridge worked on Alternative 3. So that was science fiction. And what was science fiction? Science fiction was a genre of literature feature films, TV shows, books, magazines, comic books, cartoons, and so forth. Even managed radio broadcasts. I'm sure some of the podcasts of this era, to create a literary genre where real developments in science, technology, applied science would be dropped into the fictional works, so that in order to keep them secret, they could point to those works in science fiction and say, see, that person was just inspired by science fiction. That was done against me in the most dishonest way by one of those media jackals who pretended to be a friend of mine and then lied about me. And that was Matt Markovich of the ABC affiliate in the very capital city where I'm admitted to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington, the federal bar, and the Washington State Bar Association, namely Seattle, Washington. KOMO was the network. He interviewed me, did a fair job on my time travel experiences, and then ended it by saying, Basiago was so certain of his time travel claims that he is either a pathological liar, a sociopath, or the fastest talking science fiction writer on the planet. But then he did something amazing. I had been interviewed by Vin DeBona for ABC Disney in January of 2008. That was to consider using my time travel experiences to do a new sort of X-Files or 24 style modern TV drama around my experiences. And I don't know why ABC and Disney didn't. I think because when they pulled my record with the Navy, they found my picture in a naval uniform. And they said, let's not do a TV show about Andy because he's for real. Let's take this naval portrait and drop it in this new Disney Pixar classic, Wall-E, which they did. It appears at 40 minutes and 14 seconds of that crazy animated Disney Pixar classic, Wall-E. That's not the photograph of the guy who played Captain Reardon or the animated version of Captain Reardon. That is me. And we even took that and compared it to my pictures from my sister's wedding in 1980. That's when that picture was taken of me. It was taken of me in October of 1980 after I'd gone to Mars twice. It was taken of me at the quartermaster's office at the Long Beach, California Naval Station. And they decided to drop it in a Disney production rather than produce an ABC Disney TV show. Because the studios and the networks are the same thing, okay? And ABC and Disney are the same thing. They are corollaries and sort of subsidiaries of each other. So after that information was revealed by me to Disney, ABC Disney, in the offices of Vin DeBona. Vin was he was the Emerson College film professor of my contact and friend and colleague, Craig DeBona. Craig had been the first camera on Godfather 3 and Prince's Honor, and the director on Rain, and The Devil's Advocate and other feature films. He had arrived, man. He's a great guy. So he wanted to see my work made into a modern TV film classic like 24 or the X-Files. But what they did is they then dropped my material into a new TV show that I was cut out of. Remember what it was?
Fringe?
Yes. When I talked about jumping through the teleporter with my dad, that's what they depicted on Fringe and other aspects of my story, which were singular, original, and my intellectual property that I was supposed to have been paid for. Mm-hmm. As a result, I didn't have the money to save my vision. So evil is not without real consequences, even unintended consequences to good people. Mm-hmm. That's why we have to fight evil for this planet and out there in our solar system and in our universe. Mm-hmm. So after they did that, when they dropped my material into Fringe, Matt Markovich of the ABC affiliate, that's an ABC affiliate, and that's who I had met with in Los Angeles in January of 2008. He then does a second show about me and said, I now know that Andrew Basiago is a fraud because, in fact, he's taken all of his ideas from the TV show Fringe. No, the TV show Fringe had stolen my ideas. Mm-hmm. Even my briefings on my radio performances about the time travel devices I was exposed to in DARPA's Project Pegasus, like the Tesla teleporter, like the chronovisor. Those words had never even been used on American television. Mm-hmm. And they were used because Fringe stole from me gratuitously. Mm-hmm. I think I will be retaining counsel to sue the makers of that production.
Good for you.
In any case, that's how the permanent secret government, the deep state, the shadow government, if you will, has many names. That's how it operates. Mm-hmm. People don't understand that there are historians and psychologists from the intelligence agencies working for the film companies like Disney and the networks like ABC.
Yeah.
There were probably CIA people or Navy people in the meetings that I had been to bonus. I know there were writers for J.J. Abrams because how else could my information have been leaked into Fringe and then Fringe used as a disinformational ploy by ABC through the ungood graces of Matt Markovich of KOMO, the Seattle affiliate, the ABC affiliate in Seattle, Washington. But that's what happened. And that was almost now 15 years ago.
All right.
So,
say Andy, I have that video of that 1962 Mars landing. Do you want me to just play that, maybe just in the background as you talk with no sound on, so people can familiarize?
Sure, if you'd like. I just want to, state that after the entry into ETs onto our planet, representing the Roswell crash, other sightings, the proof with the overflights over the Capitol in 1952, and then the passage of NERA, they had to start exploring in science fiction what might happen when we went into space and discovered something. They certainly knew 2 years later that Mars had been reached by U.S. astronauts, and that's what I was going to go into next. So if you want to play it in the back, I can talk about
it's going
what that happened 2 years later.
It's going now, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so Alternative 3 is made as science fiction in 1962. They do a really good job at depicting what Mars looks like in some places. Mm-hmm. And U.S. astronauts landed on the Red Planet for the first time in 1964. They crash landed. They were injured. At least one of the two major Martian humanoid species agreed to rescue them and then reneged. Mm. And they died of exposure on the surface.
Wow.
Now, how do we know that? We know that because when I was training to go to Mars in 1980, I and two of my classmates, an individual named Barry Sotoro, who would later change his name to Barack Obama, and Regina Elvira Dugan, were sent from August, September of 1980 back to June of 1980 via teleportation-based time travel. And we were living in a remote area of the student dorms at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California, where we were all being trained to go to Mars. Myself, Obama, Dugan, Stillings, Mendez, McCool, and others. Eric Schoenfeld is the name of one of our other trainees, we believe, and a few other names that we don't remember or never knew really very well. We're told their names, but then quickly forgot because many of them did not go on to the Red Planet. And so Obama, Dugan, and I were sent back several months, and we were sort of sequestered there in the dorms while we were working on the CIA's threat assessment regarding the Martian humanoid civilization. Did it present a threat to life on Earth? We were not supposed to talk to each other, but before turning our papers in to Major Ed Dames at the end of that 2-month period, and just stepping back into our class and rejoining all of our colleagues and the parents there, like my father, Brett's father, Regina's mother, and so forth. Obama's alleged or putative mother, Stanley Ann Dunham. But on the way back to Ed Dames' office to turn in our theses for our analysis of whether the Martian humanoids presented a threat, it was clear that I had concluded that we could not determine that, or that, actually, no, that they were not a threat, as we would define a threat militarily. Dugan stated they were, and then Obama never told us. And isn't it interesting that I went on to be a major figure in the truth movement, perhaps the person who sort of kicked it off in a meaningful way. Obama became president, the one who didn't tell us what he had concluded, and then the one who went on to be the first woman to direct DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which has been involved in some very important but also some very nefarious projects, particularly recently, insisted that her reading of the 4-inch thick dossier of French intelligence documents that we had to read in the French language, because we had all studied it, was that the Martian humanoid civilization did present a threat, and that did serve her interests as somebody interested in working in the defense industry, didn't it? But anyway, so that was what we learned about 1964 from the lens of 1980. In other words, in one of the French intelligence documents, it was a document attributed, I remember, to the French External Intelligence Agency, the name of which I forget because it's French. I was never that good in French. I could kind of passively read the document, at least get maybe 60% of the vocabulary. So I knew basically what they were talking about. We all wrote these theses. One I hope never surfaces, because I'm sure Obama's and Dugan's was probably better writing than mine. I remember Dugan even typed hers up, which was like something I wouldn't get into until I transferred to UCLA, typing out my papers for the Daily Bruin, my articles for the Daily Bruin, and my term papers. But anyway, 1968 then marked the next major point in the first wave of gatekeeping. But before I get to that, let me make it clear that this 1964 data point was not shared with me until 1980 in French, in the French language, in French External Intelligence Agency documents that Obama and Dugan and I read to write that our theses, which were then to be added to the CIA's threat assessment regarding the Martian humanoid civilization. So now we're going from, remember, we're jumping back to 64 because that's what we learned in 80, but now we're jumping back to 1968. Around the time that I first started teleporting in DARPA's Project Pegasus between New Jersey and New Mexico and New Jersey, stopping in Salon, Ohio if the teleporter failed for any reason, and then teleporting in either direction halfway across the country. My father comes home from work, his job at the Ralph M. Parsons Company, which then, of course, was still on Wall Street in New York City. And he had some kind of document, some kind of dossier. And he gathered my mother and 4 older siblings and myself together in our living room in Morris Plains, New Jersey. And he said, listen, everybody, I want to read to you this hysterical paper. It's written by this guy who imagines what it's going to be like when we start finding out what's on Mars. And you're not going to believe what he said. So he starts laughing and reading this 3-page document. And I could see that he was looking up at me, and that although he was somewhat inebriated from, let's say, having stopped for a drink after work with his friends, but he wasn't, I wouldn't say he was drunk, but he clearly was was a little bit tipsy, a little bit inebriated.
Okay.
He was also looking up at me as he was doing the reading, and I thought, is my dad signaling to me that I'm somehow responsible for this document? So, Aaron, I did something I never did before and I've never done since. I ran up to my late father, who was then, let's see, in 68, he was 45 years old. I was 7. And I snatched this dossier out of his hands. And I ran away from him across the living room, and he said, give me that dossier. And as I was running with this manila folder open, the cover document stapled inside this manila envelope, this manila folder, was, it said CIA memorandum, and it said, Andrew Basiago, excerpts from The Discovery of Life on Mars, 2008.
Wow.
So I was able to reconstruct years later, because after all, Aaron, I wouldn't write The Discovery of Life on Mars until 2008, 40 years later. So in 1968, apparently what they did was the CIA went into my 41-page paper from 40 years in the future, and they gave my dad what would be known as an expurgated or bowdlerized version of my paper. My paper was 41 pages, but all he was reading was 3 pages or so of the most farcical, the most humorous, the most imaginative, the most corny references that I intentionally would put in that paper 40 years later. Why did I do that? Because, Aaron, I was writing a paper in which I was calling it The Discovery of Life on Mars, even though I had been there and knew that there was life on Mars and had been trained on the life on Mars, because as a Cambridge graduate, I wanted to use a title that was sort of like Darwin's The Origin of the Species or Origin of the Species. I was sitting there in a storm in Portland after spending a year examining NASA image PIA, NASA JPL image PIA 10214, and I thought, what is going to be a great name for this work? Now, why was that? Because I knew that this would be the first work to show pictures and talk about and declare discoveryship of humanoid beings, different animal species, statues, and sculptures and structures on another planet in the solar system and the wider universe beyond our planet. So I knew after writing it, and as I was writing, that it was an important breakthrough paper. That's why I called it The Discovery of Life on Mars. I think if I had it to do all over again, I would have named it simply Exploring Life on Mars. Because in fact, while I was claiming discoveryship, that was based on the scientific convention that it's not discovery, but the claiming of discoveryship that is credited with discoveryship in science. In other words, when Tom Van Flanderen made his announcement at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. in 2006, do you remember what he said?
No.
He basically said that these are fossils of what died out on Mars when life was beginning on Earth 3 million years ago. In other words, while Tom Van Flanderen published images of vegetative life on Mars, he declared they were artifacts of life on Mars. He wasn't declaring discoveryship of life on Mars. So that also motivated me, because I was aware of Dr. Tom Van Flanderen's important contribution. But essentially, I also know, as somebody who served in Project Pegasus and Project Mars, that when I was just a little boy, a 7-year-old, the literature of the secret space program was already being architected on a gatekeeper basis by doing what? Leaking a completely jaundiced, expurgated, boulderized, de minimis, highly edited. I mean, edited by what? 38 pages.
Wow.
And giving it to my late father to take home. They probably fed him a drink or two before sending him home with the paper, right? I don't know. And And I think the net effect was maybe to inhibit me about writing the paper at that time. Then, 1969.
Yeah.
The gatekeeping regarding the secret space program and life on other planets and my own destiny going to the red planet took somewhat of a turn probably with the landing of Armstrong and Aldrin on our moon. 1969, my dad takes me up to the study of our house in Morris Plains, 3 stories on the left side of the house, the study across from the bedroom that I shared with my 2 older brothers. That's where he used to give me a crew cut with those old clippers,
Sure.
those old electric hair clippers.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically, took him about like 5 seconds to give me a crew cut or a flat top, right?
Sure.
And after that, he goes to his briefcase from Carson and he pulls out a picture. And he says, "Take a look at this, Andy." And I said, "Well, what is it, Dad?" And he said, a picture of humanoids. And I said, "Where? From where?" And he said, "Mars." And he said, take a good look at it." And he goes, "Guess who finds it?" And I say, "Who, Dad? Who and how would somebody find this picture of a humanoid on Mars?" And he says, "You do."
Mm-hmm.
NASA starts sending rovers up there, and you study the photos they're sending back, and you publish this. This is the first photo of a humanoid that will be published on Earth. And of course, these were being quantum accessed via Project Pegasus. And we say from 2008, but really it's more accurate to say from 2008 or later, because, I don't know exactly when in the future they brought them back to the past.
Right.
The point is they had my 2008 paper in 1968, 69. Now, what was that photo from 69? It was my original finding, the humanoid being on Tsiolkovsky Ridge. That's right there in NASA JPL image PIA 10214. That's the first major discovery of life on Mars. It is to the data that has been sent back from the rovers, Spirit, Opportunity, and Curiosity, and that fourth one, Perseverance, or whatever they decided to call it, that the base on Mars at Cydonia has been to the satellite images from the red planet, or let's say the finding of Hoagland, Barra, and Monk of the connection between the Cydonia region, the Cydonia area, and the Great Pyramid area. They did a complete correlation between Cydonia and Giza. And that's a huge discovery, but of course from the space-based or satellite-based images from the red planet, my contribution then picked up the rover-based discoveries of what's on the red planet. But that was known by 68 because they had my paper, or they couldn't have taken 3 pages of the most silly, farcical, creative, imaginative elements of my paper, which I put in there to interest children in what I had found. That was my motivation. It was sort of like, they want them to be as creative as Dr. Seuss, but I wanted them to be observational that kids would find fanciful and interesting as imaginative, which I guess is part of your work as an artist and toy designer. And okay, so that's 69. My dad shows me my finding of the humanoid being on Tsiolkovsky Ridge. Now, did I make that finding? You betcha. As Louis Reinhardt is fond of acknowledging somewhat frequently, and I appreciate Louis for it, I spent all of 2008 analyzing that one photograph.
Wow.
I described in my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, how 10214 is a treasure trove of photographs of humanoid beings, different animal species, and statues and structures on the red planet. And that indeed it is. Okay, so another year passes.
1970?
1970.
Okay, 1970.
And my dad says, "Come on, Andy, let's go in the VW in the bug." He had a blue Volkswagen Beetle.
Okay.
So I get into my dad's little Volkswagen, the one he used to take to the train station in Morris Plains or Morristown to take the train in to pick up the subway in New York and go into Parsons.
Okay.
And I said, "Oh, Dad, this is actually 2 years after I've been going up to Curtis Wright. I've been telling the family, talking to my mom or my siblings, I'm taking Andy to the hardware store in Florham Park, and instead going up to Curtis Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Woodridge, New Jersey, and we've been jumping via teleportation to New Mexico, spending hours, days, weeks, and months there, in my case, years in his case." So I get into his bug, and I say, "Dad, are we going to New Mexico again?" And he says, "No, Andy, we're going over to blah, blah, blah air base." I forget the name of the base, but it was an air base. And I said, "Why, Dad?" And he said, "There's some Martians over there that I want to introduce you to." And I'm asking him all the way over for like a half hour from Morris Plains to wherever this air base was in New Jersey. And he actually stops the car and he says, "Son, they are human beings like us, except they're from Mars. They are Martians." And I go over there and I walk into this huge hangar, and there's kind of a teardrop-shaped silver craft at the end of like a loading dock. And it's just sitting there going put, 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 maybe about 3 feet off the ground. Not a UFO, but like a teardrop-shaped conventional craft that nonetheless was hovering just by making this gentle put-put noise. And my dad and I walk over to this briefing room over on the left side of the hangar, and there are 3 Martians there. 2 were tall and muscular and bald. They looked like Governor Jesse Ventura, Patrick Stewart from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Mm-hmm. One was smaller, more scholarly looking, more nerdy, more intellectual, with curly hair and male pattern baldness, with like a curly hair going around a fringe around his head. Okay. Kind of like Larry Neal, the Three Stooges.
Sure.
The others look maybe a little bit more like Jackie Coogan of the Addams Family.
All right. Wow.
But with the physique of, let's say, a Jesse Ventura. And we sit down, and my dad is served a coffee. I'm given like a 7-Up or something, a Coke. And the more scholarly one said, "My dad, he's a rather handsome lad, Ray." So I realized that these Martians are speaking English. Perfect, unaccented English. But then after a meeting, they walk out in front of my dad and I, out across the loading dock in the hangar to their ship. Mm-hmm. And one of them stopped, the last one stopped, and said to my dad, "Well, Ray, it was a pleasure visiting your beautiful planet again, and a privilege meeting your young son, Andrew. I hope we can meet again next time we visit Earth." And my dad says, "Yes, whatever." I forget exactly the name that he used. I think it's in my Mars book.
Okay.
These memories come and go, of course, but I'm dealing with 50 and 45 and 40-year-old memories.
Yeah.
In this case,
yeah.
a 52-year-old memory as of today. And they then, all 3 of them, walk across the loading dock, and they're all carrying like these oxygen machines. They look like almost like phonographs of that era, but you could see that there were tubes from them that were connected to their nostril, like a cannula. So they were getting some kind of oxygen enhancement here on Earth. I don't know why, because Mars is actually deficient in oxygen. So maybe they were actually getting their oxygen levels cut with what they were being fed. That would probably be it.
Uh-huh.
So anyway,
Wow.
they then get into this little teardrop-shaped craft. It takes out of the hangar, put, same height, and then goes out into the tarmac. And there were two guys from the Air Force or Defense Department there, maybe even from Ralph M. Parsons. And one of them, they knew my name because I was my father's son. That was on Project Pegasus. They say, "Now watch this, Andy." And the ship lets out this huge blast of exhaust, of fire, as it were.
Wow.
A contrail that looked like flame.
Wow.
And it goes zoom and takes off from the tarmac at about 6,000 miles per hour. Wow. And then my dad says, "Andy, I don't know how those three guys stand in there in that tiny little craft." I said, "Well, what do you mean, Dad?" He said, "They told me it takes them 24 hours to get back to Mars." I said, "I wouldn't be able to stand that."
Wow.
He said, "Must get pretty gamey in there." Three adult males in some teardrop-shaped ship about the size of those MG midgets of that era for 24 hours
Oh my goodness.
between Earth and Mars.
Wow.
So anyway, that was what happened in 1970. And so the point I'm making here with these early data points on Mars is who was the gatekeeper in my life at that time? Who would you say?
Your dad.
That's it. How better to deal with somebody who was going to go to Mars at a time, 1981, when, according to my late, great Mars astronaut colleague, William Whitecrow, original name, of course, was William Paris, as in the city. They took the name William Whitecrow as sort of an avatar name, a scholar of spirituality. But they knew I would write the paper in 2008 after going there between 1981 and 84. So what better way to acquaint somebody with that destiny than to go to their father, who was in the sort of the Defense Department intelligence engineering nexus, and just gradually bring me up to speed on what my destiny held. Mm-hmm. So they were doing it again. They meet these three astronauts as they're completing sort of a liaison mission in New Jersey, and one of them sort of studies me. They must have known what my destiny was as either a Mars explorer between 1981 and 84, or as the author of the discovery of life on Mars in 2008, because there's no other way they would have dropped such secret as Martians literally visiting an air base in New Jersey with a small teardrop-shaped, silver-colored conventional spacecraft.
Wow.
Had I not been in a need to know. That was the basis by which, and still is the basis by which intelligence secrets are shared. Classified means nobody sees it. It is classified as above top secret, need to know basis only, whatever, based on need to know and higher purposes. So they were clearly using my father's as a gatekeeper for my ultimate adjustment to the fact that I would be going to Mars and then writing an important work about the red planet. That would be my theory about what they were doing. Do I believe I have any Martian blood? Possibly, if it is true that everybody in the blood groups, the original Aryan blood groups, identified by Congressman Ignatius Donnelly in his famous work, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. You'll be happy to know, Aaron, as an Irish descended individual, at least partly, that the Celtic, the Germanic, the Slavic, the Greek, the Italic, the Persian, and the Indian from India, which of course would include the Indian, the Pakistani, and the Bengali, are all the Aryan groups. Aryan refers to Aries, Mars. So when we ask, why did Basiago, why did Obama, who announced his Irish ancestry, remember, Why did Dugan, who told me she was Irish? Why did Dilling, who was part Irish and part British? Why did somebody who was Celtic, Germanic, and Slavic, partly myself, as well as Italic, Greek, and North African, and hence possibly part Indian, why was I sent? In other words, I have identified that everybody in training in 1980 for Project Mars was from these Aryan blood groups. And again, Aryan or Aryan means Aries, and it refers to Mars. So they've known since the days of Ignatius Donnelly that specific blood groups of modern humans have an endowment from Mars. Maybe that's why we were selected. Maybe that's another reason why I was briefed in 1970 by meeting these 3 Martian astronauts, because they were going to expand the U.S. and British and Russian sort of Aryan presence from Earth on the original Aryan planet. And after all, I mentioned how the Homo Martis Terris, the Martians who look like us, which those 3 gentlemen were from that particular group of Martian humanoids, they were from Earth. They were the descendants of the Earthlings from antiquity who were trapped on the red planet after the solar system catastrophe of 9,500 BC.
Wow.
We think that may have been from a Vela supernova explosion, but we really don't know. It could have been from a nuclear war on Mars. And in any case, so 1970, they clearly made an effort to acquaint me to something that had nothing to do with the Pop-Tarts and the Fruit Loops I was eating, or the Apple Jacks, nothing to do with the kickball and the softball I was playing, or the Frisbee I was throwing around the neighborhood. This was far out stuff for a little kid. And yet they made a decision to acquaint me to that at around age 8 or 9.
Wow.
Well, actually, no, age 7. And then had me actually meet Martians when I was not even 10 years old. 1971.
So
I'm recovering from a...
Hold on a second there. Hold that thought. Getting back to that teardrop-shaped vehicle now, I've done a drawing. I think I showed it to you. Is the point in the front or the point in the back?
The back.
Okay, that's the way I had it. Now,
when they got in, they lifted up like one of those doors that come down from the bottom of a ship. When I say opened up, they opened down the hatch.
Okay.
To get and they stepped up into the ship.
Okay.
But it was just like 3 guys getting into an MG midget with the back side of the MG midget shaped into a sharp point.
Oh, wow.
There was less room than an MG midget.
I was in an MG midget with 2 other guys. We were chasing a tornado, but that's a different story. I have to also tell you before you go on to 1971 that a memory of mine came up on Facebook the other day. It was a painting I did of a ship at rough sea, like in sunset. So sunset colors. It's a really kind of cool colors. And William Whitecrow commented on it. He said something nice, and he said, makes me want to get back to art. So I'm hoping that he did get back to doing his art. So,
well, I hope that he didn't die. I hope that he faked his death.
Yeah.
Or he was allowed to age, undergo age regression. Perhaps we can do a show on that subject at some point when I collect enough information to what I believe is going on.
Okay.
I don't know that he's dead. We're getting a lot of closed casket type burials of very sensitive people.
Sure.
I think we might even need to pass a law congressionally to require open casket before even, let's say, cremation and closed casket, because in point of fact, I was unsuccessful in reaching anybody who was related to him or knew him, confirming his passing.
Wow.
So we're not even sure that Whitecrow is deceased. And William, if you're out there, just check in by phone with me, regardless of what your new age is, if you were age regress. You might be an 18-year-old William Whitecrow, and I'm sure you're enjoying yourself if you are. But being a man's man, as it were, and probably winning bodybuilding competitions with your new 18-year-old build worthy of the Incredible Hulk. But William, I don't know that you're dead, and I do thank you for endorsing me for president and valorizing the service of the U.S. chrononauts and U.S. astronauts. That was a great move by you, but I don't think you're dead, and I, in fact, don't believe you're dead. So anyway, second one. So anyway, 1971,
okay.
I'm recovering from a terrible bout of bronchitis, which would carry with it the benefit of never being able to smoke. I tried it when I was about 25. I started hacking, and I realized it was my bronchitis, and I have never smoked. And therefore, at 60, my heart is fine, and as well as my lungs. So it's 1971. I'm recovering from this terrible bout of the bronchitis, intensified by the fact that I begged my mother to go out and do my last experience of trick-or-treating on Halloween. I was now 10, getting a little bit too old for that. But I had to get that pillowcase full of candy, which I would become addicted to. Probably something I probably would have benefited not becoming addicted to chocolate. And my dad comes into the sick room in our house in Mars Plains, and he says, "Son, I have a paper here. I want you to read." And he hands it to me, and he says, "Look at the title." And I read the title, "The Discovery of Life on Mars." And he says, "Look down below on that first page. Look who reads it. I mean, excuse me, who writes it?" And I say, "I do." I said, "But Dad, why does it say Andrew D. Basiago?" And he says, "Oh, you took the name Daniel for your confirmation name as a Catholic." I said,
He told you that.
So now, taken it yet. I'll be confirmed at age 13.
So you could
still just using my birth name, Andrew Basiago. Didn't have a middle name, but the paper had my middle initial. It was also written in Microsoft Arial, and I believe Times New Roman, or maybe just a smaller version of Arial. I'd have to go back and look at it.
Okay.
So that had to be from the future, because my middle initial and that type font did not exist yet.
Wow.
And yet my dad had me read it. He said, "Son, the purpose of this exercise," he said, "I'm going to go away for a couple hours. The purpose of this exercise is for you to read this paper several times, look at every picture, try to relate the material in the captions to each and every picture, try to relate the text and the pictures to each other, and the pictures to each other." And I said, "Why, Dad? Why do I have to do this if I'm not going to?" Oh, no, then I'm getting ahead of myself. He then said, "Look when you write it, son." And I said, 2008. And he said, "Yeah, how many years is that?" I said, 37. And he said, "Yeah, 29 plus 8 is 37. That's right, son. Yeah, you're going to write this in 2008, 37 years." And then he tells me the purpose of this exercise. He said, is to, do all those things. And he said, because when you do write this paper 37 years from now, we want it to contain as much information about life forms on Mars as possible. Now, that's gatekeeping of a major nature. And cynics have said, skeptics and those who have a little bit too much confidence in their positives, we're saying, well, Andy was just fed this paper. No, I wasn't fed the paper. I read it once or twice in 1971. Are they crediting me with being some kind of idiot savant who could read a single-spaced 41-page paper and 37 years later write it from memory? No, I'm sorry. I mean, I have a good memory, but my memory's not that good. I'm not some kind of, idiot savant memory Mephisto. So I really wrote it in 2000, spending most of the year doing it, and then an intensive period when there was a massive, in the 3 weeks leading up to 12/12/08, there was a massive snowstorm in Portland, Oregon, where I was then living. while practicing law over in Vancouver, Washington. And I was snowed in by like 6 feet. I couldn't even get out of that little house that I was house sitting for a friend and living in, And I wrote Discovered Life on Mars based on a year of research. I had piles of data about what I had found in 10214, and I just started turning it into that paper. I was sleeping between 6 a.m. and noon, and then working for 18 hours. I did that for 3 weeks while living on 1 slice a day of honey-baked ham, pan-fried, 2 eggs, and a cup of coffee, and a piece of toast. And when I finished the paper and walked through 6-foot snowdrifts to mail it to the National Geographic, which honored the great legacy of that public institution, the National Geographic Society, by stealing my work 8 years later in a special edition of the National Geographic, on the cover which reads capital M, capital A, capital R, capital S, the name of the 13,500 member leading Mars anomaly group in the world, the Mars Anomaly Research Society, that I founded after I wrote The Discovery of Life on Mars in 2008. At that time, the National Geographic did me the great service of not even responding to my letter, I guess because they did want to steal from me, as they ultimately would 8 years later. So I sent it. I walked through snowdrifts all the way over a couple streets in Portland, and then walked home and tested my weight on a scale and my glucose, and it was all perfect because I've been living on ham, eggs, honey-baked ham that I had rendered by pan frying it, getting all that sugar out of it. Mm-hmm. 2 eggs and a piece of toast and a cup of coffee. I had like 28 Folgers singles. And it really worked, man. So check out the ham, egg, and coffee diet if you want to lose weight, knock down your glucose. So anyway, It was ultimately very healthy to just be sleeping between midnight and 6 a.m. and then working for 18 hours. But that's how I wrote the paper in 2008.
Wow.
But had I read it twice in 1971, you betcha, the true story.
Wow.
And it's in my Mars memoir, which is completed and will be published.
That's incredible.
And is now hidden in safe houses all over the world, I'm happy to report.
I'm so glad to hear
those people to publish it if there's a strike against me. So don't try it, guys. I'm
so glad to hear that your memory is not perfect, because my memory, I can't remember half the things I've forgotten. But yeah.
Well, I've been listening to our broadcasts and my broadcasts with other broadcasters, Aaron, and I'm not forgetting things. I'm just making mistakes. I'll just. I was talking about Lincoln's assassination in 1865. I said 1863. I said April 15th, 1863. So I find that with age, I'm not forgetting things, but I am misspeaking. So if I do misspeak, remember my books, as Shakespeare said in Sonnet 18, in my works shall I ever live young. Remember that? No. Devouring time, blunt though the lion's paw, blah, 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 blah. In my prose shall my life ever live young, or whatever.
Okay.
My books are the final statement of my experiences. And that's all I've been. I've never set out to be a truth teller, a politician, a public figure, a celebrity, a public speaker, anything, a media personality. My only goal was simply to historically record my experiences, because I believe that every lifetime is an experiment, and that everything that we experience in any lifetime, in every lifetime, is experience. Experience is what matters. It matters more than glory, and it matters more than fictional assertions of what life has included. That, I think, is one of the negative legacies, not just of science fiction, but of all fiction. I mean, I love Hemingway's prose because he would always go experience. He had experienced being a bullfighter, or fighting in the Spanish Civil War before writing For Whom the Bell Tolls, or he would spend a month sleeping in the boat of a fisherman in some harbor in Cuba before writing The Old Man and the Sea and so forth. I mean, Hemingway was an experientialist, and that's sort of been my inspiration all along.
Okay.
As well as Steinbeck, as well as Sinclair Lewis. I mean, I believe that the great Nobel laureates from this country have known that experience of themselves or others that's meaningful is what matters, what we should be writing and talking about. Okay, so 1971, I have had my father give me a foretaste of the most farcical, comedic parts of my paper from, at that point, 40 years in the future. I have met 3 Martian astronauts.
Mm-hmm.
I have read my future paper from 37 years in the future twice, looked at the pictures, and now it's 1972. What was the big deal in 72 that actually relates to what we're seeing in the so-called literature of the secret space program that is either true or is essentially disinformation? What was the critical thing that happened in 1972?
Oh man, so many things happened in 1972. I mean, you went off the gold. We went off the gold standard, and
yes, that was one of them.
Went to the petrodollar. It was the first year of Roe v. Wade.
It was the opening to environmentalism and dealing with the Chinese by Nixon, and kind of his the zenith of his performance or accomplishments as president before Watergate. And his re-election. But I think the critical thing in cosmic terms, in our quest for the truth, not just any truth, certainly not made up truth, which we'll be exploring, especially next week. We were chased off the moon. Apollo 17 was the last of the lunar landings that had gone from July 20th, 1969 with Apollo 11, Apollo 12, and then the aborted mission of Apollo 13, and then the missions of Apollo 14, 15, 16, and 17. It was in 1972 with Apollo 17 that the 6 lunar landings, allowing for walking on the moon by 12 American astronauts, ended our lunar landing program, which had begun with such fanfare in April of 1961 by our beloved late President John F. Kennedy. Now, what can we say about 2022? We can clearly say that from the perspective of what the media has revealed, from the perspective of what NASA has revealed, from the perspective of the Jules Bergmans of ABC News of today on CNN and MSNBC and CNBC and PBS and all of them, CBS, ABC, NBC, the ones who so artfully lied about my time travel experiences, they have at least not been reporting on any additional U.S. missions to our moon. That was 1972. What did my dad's employer, Parsons, do?
I don't know.
1972. It moved from New York City to Los Angeles on its way to that incredible 6-acre campus in Pasadena, California.
Okay, wow.
Changed my destiny, going from being a New Jersey native to somebody dealing with the pathology and the violence of studying at the junior high school, and college level in California. An instrumentality of the deep state, according to one of my most gifted and accomplished fellow lawyers, the great J.J. Sandlin of the Washington State Bar Association and the U.S. District Court, or the Western District of Washington, of which I am a member. California is part of the deep state. So Parsons moves out to that most mobbed up of the deep state states, California. That changes my personal destiny. But we have to kind of contextualize that in the fact that these American astronauts who were working on time travel and would ultimately be assisting us in going to Mars with one of those time travel devices, the aeronautical repositioning chamber, when we were chased off the moon in 1972 by 6 ET species, Parsons and all of the defense contractors were moving to California and other western states, Colorado to some extent. About 50% of my classmates in Chatsworth, California, were the sons and daughters of engineers, technical writers, and employees of defense contractors, including my high school classmates Val Kilmer and Kevin Spacey, the future actors. I remember them talking about it when we were in high school. So there was clearly a shift that occurred 50 years ago. We cannot speak of the secret space program without acknowledging that the reason we would start the practice of going to the red planet, which I date at 1976, was because we were chased off the moon 4 years earlier. Now, why do I say I'm fairly sure we started going to the red planet in 1976? Well, look, the modern myth that Howard Robart Hughes died in that disgraceful way in April of 1976 while flying back to Houston from Latin America. Remember that story about how Hughes would become demented and grow the hair on his head down to his backside and be obsessed with watching Ice Station Zebra over and over again while eating black walnut ice cream and covering everything with tissues? That was disinformation to conceal the fact that Hughes was working on a submersible intended to pick a downed Soviet submarine off the floor of the Pacific. That's the device being called the Glomar Explorer, and the very aeronautical repositioning chamber that we were using to get to the red planet. And Michael C. Rell, the first of my U.S. astronaut colleagues to come forward to discuss going to the red planet, what did he describe in 1999? He described going to Mars via jump room, via the Ark, the space elevator, from 1976 to 1996. Then being age regressed 20 years and going back in time 20 years and being honorably discharged in 1976. So in understanding the modern literature of the secret space program, we cannot ignore these data points. We cannot ignore the fact that we were going to Mars because we had been chased off the moon in 1972. And at this late year in time, have not gone back for 50 years. That has to matter. I'm sure that the body of Jules Bergman, if he is no longer with us, and I don't think he is rolling in the grave. Bless him. Although, of course, spiritually he's gone on to his reward and doing something else. But everybody wants to avoid that fact. We have not gone back to the moon in 50 years. So how can people just suddenly in 2013 and 14 start likely claiming, oh yeah, I would go up to the moon and I would go to Mars, Ceres, blah, 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 blah. No, we haven't gone back in 50 years, okay? Can we deal with the data points even NASA agrees with before those who served in the secret space program can share why they went to the red planet? It's because we were seeking the high road, because we were chased off the moon. Okay. So the faking of the death of Hughes in 76 and the testimony of Michael C. Rell has all been linked up, and it's critically important to understanding the evolving claims and truth or falsity of the literature of the secret space program, this whole body of alleged truth-telling in the truth movement. Okay.
Well, but I have to just add there that even though we were warned off the moon in 72 or whenever it was, that doesn't...
With Apollo 17, when Apollo 17 was coming back from the moon.
But that doesn't mean that sometime in the future, the secret military or some faction of the secret military made a deal with the people on the moon to have a little base there. That's
okay, Aaron. If that's true, and I grant that could be true, how come there's such a large plurality of secret space program claimants who never talk about that having occurred?
Well,
the
maybe
person
they
who
don't.
considered the idea
Maybe they
of
don't
the
know.
Mars Colony Corporation was Randy Kramer, and I found him lying.
Well,
Where is the historical validation of the need to have gone beyond what the U.S. was doing on the moon? And also, why, if Kennedy had started us on this path, why would NASA be complicit in lying about its future accomplishments going to the moon if it had already sent 6 missions there successfully? Why would they have suddenly shut up about what they or somebody else was doing? In other words, I'm using simple logic to frame my brief, my historical case, that I don't think anybody from this planet has been on the moon since 1972. You're offering a possible explanation for the secret space program people, but you're not contextualizing what they're claiming, you see?
Well, but I'm just... But now I know the Russians, I think they crashed a couple of ships, or at least one ship on the far side of the moon, trying to land on the moon before we did. And so
the Chinese are supposed to be trying to land on it, or have. I'm not saying the moon hasn't been the locus of ongoing work, but I'm saying, look, when so many people who have become part of the modern, like post 2013, 2014 splurge or explosion of claims of involvement in the secret space program, and that's what we're talking about tonight in this first of 2 parts of the secret space program, Rediscovered, here on the Quest for Truth. All I'm saying is that when you say that somebody else has taken them to our moon, you have to say, okay, and therefore NASA has either lied to us for 50 years about its later accomplishments or some other group's accomplishments for this reason. And I'm asking you right now, Aaron, what is that reason?
Well,
why would NASA do that?
Well, I think that NASA, like you said, was set up as a disinformation to the public, and certainly they're not going to tell any secret stuff to the people. And
that's not what I said. I actually said that NERA, the original space agency, was set up with the primary mission, the legislative mandate, the expansion of human knowledge of space and the near Earth environment, and then they got caught up on the fact that we were being visited by beings from elsewhere. Now, if, as Ken Johnston has informed us, there are 6 ET species, and by the way, Ken is not only somebody who served in Project Mars with me and saved my life on the Red Planet by picking me up in the device he would pilot, which was known variously as either the Sky Taxi or the Hopper. Ken has given me a NASA briefing document with 57 autographs and salutations to him personally, not 57, but about 20, from named astronauts who worked on Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, the Skylab, and the Space Shuttle. Even Ellison Onizuka, that brave Japanese-American gentleman who died aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986. So these are historical autographs that Ken was collecting the whole time he was working with U.S. astronauts. And he is the source for the convincing information I've got that, look, Andy, human beings from this planet were chased off the moon with Apollo 17. And that explains why NASA never went back for 50 years and never explained why they went back, and even probably launched the disinformational ploy of the Bart Sobrell incident. Oh, yeah, Buzz Aldrin punched him in the face. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, his astronaut colleague, my astronaut colleague, kicked him in the butt. Michael Collins walked away from him at sharp angles, like his head was going to explode. Neil Armstrong told him that the Bible he was asking him to sign was probably a fake Bible. Can you see all those 4 American astronauts being at all disturbed by what Bart Sobrell was confronting him with? No. Yeah. Confronting them with? No. So what I'm saying is that what we have to examine is, okay, NASA stops going to the moon in 72. A NASA employee, Dr. Ralph Kennedy Johnston, who not only went to Mars, but who worked with me on Mars and provided a NASA briefing document with 57 pieces of written evidence from the overt space program, has stated, look, no Earthlings have gone back since 1972, and you're taking the testimony of that known and proven U.S. astronaut, just like Neil Armstrong, just like Buzz Aldrin, just like me and Brett Dillon, somebody I worked with. I wasn't trained with Ken Johnston, but I worked with him once, and he gave me his name, and he saved my life and White Crow's life from predators. And you're saying, okay, Andy, all that being as it is, I'm going to believe Johann Fritz, even though his real name is Will Nutter. You see, what I'm saying is I have proven this through somebody who has provided written proof of his overwhelmingly significant work with NASA on every overt or publicly disclosed space mission as someone, myself and Ken, in the secret space program. And people keep on holding up people making claims, and as we'll find on the show in a week, they're not offering anything to substantiate their claims. They're just saying, I was on a spaceship, I was on the moon, I was on the moon, Mars, and Ceres, or whatever. And we'll go over that next week. I don't want to get ahead on that.
All right.
But anyway, I'm saying that Ken Johnston is for real. Basiago, Stillings, Mendez, White Crow, and Johnston are for real. I believe that Ralph and Neumann were for real. I believe that Laura Eisenhower, as the niece of somebody I went to Mars with and interacted with on the Red Planet on March 3rd, 1983, Mary Jean Eisenhower, her aunt, is real. I believe the fact that the Eisenhower, the Stillings, the Basiago, the Hunts, and other families were going is all part of what was being worked on as part of a secret space program. But I believe that many who have stepped up in the last roughly 8 or 9 years have blithely claimed involvement in that secret space program, but not overcome the hurdle, which is what I've been working on for 20 years, Aaron, and secrecy itself. Remember when I said that the modern dilemma that's impeding humanity on Earth is metaphysical oppression from secrecy, just in previous epochs, even in this country. It was physical oppression through slavery. That's why I lauded David Icke. I described him as the William Wilberforce of our time. Because in the same way that William Wilberforce led the battle against metaphysical oppression from slavery, David Icke has led it from, rather physical oppression from slavery. David Icke has led the battle against metaphysical oppression from secrecy. From everything, bloodlines, reptilians, government conspiracies, assassinations, all the way down the line. Everything in Mr. Icke's brilliant work has been, I think, important.
Yes, and
as the William Wilberforce of our time.
And
what I'm doing,
your brilliant work of bringing this information forward, because whenever they hold back technology, it holds back the whole humanity. I think that's what you're saying. Like when after the Apollo mission, what came on the market? Like calculators, watches, LCD, LED. That was all developed for the moon program, and that was a public program. And there were industries and jobs created, and people's lives were made better. So just think if they did that with teleportation and all these other things that you experienced, if it was made public.
Right. At the same time, we've been forced to engage in the quest for truth because of the oppressive impact of official state secrecy. Now, because of that in fact has made proving or disproving the assertion that there have been lunar landings since 1972 presently impossible. That's why I've been forced to use extrinsic evidence from my own experiences and the experiences of other astronauts to verify that we were going to Mars. And also remember the statements we shared about that going to Mars. Like Courtney Hunt's statement to me when I said, well, Courtney, why do I have to go to Mars? I never wanted to be an astronaut. I want to be a lawyer and a writer. Well, I am a writer, and I want to also possibly be a lawyer. And he said because the survival of the human race on Earth depends on it. Does that fit into the scenario that we have gotten through the good graces of Ken Johnson? And by the way, I also want to give my great friend Ken Johnson a shout out. I know he's just had some surgery, and Ken, I wish you the best. Speedy recovery. You're a great man. But I just also want to say on this broadcast that in addition to working on Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, the Space Shuttle, and Project Mars, Ken Johnson was the American who took NASA's photograph of all of the evidence of these huge fossils on the moon out of NASA, and hence is a major figure in the truth movement and the literature of the secret space program for doing so. In other words, when we were chased off of the moon in 1972, NASA was already engaged in a manipulation of data to disguise the fact that there's fossils of huge animals all over the moon. I believe that Tim Cohen, the writer, will be exploring those fossils and also evidence of what he found on Mars in his books or book series, series, Solar Apocalypse. And we are going to be focusing on what Mars has found on the red planet in the 2028 publication of the 20-year history of what Mars has found. We've had like 35 major Mars anomalies contributing to the group that I founded. And so we are not trying to hold back the truth. We are going to be talking about Ken Johnson's significant and brave effort to get the truth about what was on the moon out of NASA.
Yeah.
So how can people blithely say, well, a couple of years after 1970, I was on the moon. I can't tell you who it was. I can't tell you what company it was. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you that it was the U.S. In fact, it wasn't the U.S. And we have to ask, well, wait a minute. If there was nothing to hide on the moon, if there was nothing to hide about us being kicked off the moon, if there was, let's say, another country or a corporation, a private concern that was continuing to land on the moon after 1972, can any of these claimants give me an explanation for why NASA would have concealed it? They don't. They just say, well, don't pay any attention to the first 8 claimants or what Andy's saying about the fact that one of his fellow astronauts has been talking about how we were chased off the moon with Apollo 17. Just listen to how I was on the moon by a spaceship. So anyway, we'll go into that next week. I don't want to get too heavily into that tonight.
Okay. But
I will give the 10 to 12 hallmarks of sort of the false threat or the dubious threat in the secret space program without naming names. So anyway, 1972. Then 36 years after we were kicked off the moon, and 1984 to 2016, plus 8 is 24. 24 years after I stopped going to Mars, and with only a year left in the memory suppression, that 25-year pattern of memory suppression that they worked in the lives of Basiago, Stillings, Mendez, White, Crow, and Johnston. And then I can really laud Michael C. Ralph and Arthur Neumann for overcoming earlier than us, in 1999 and in 2006, not in 2009 when I came forward. 2008, I write my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, having flashbacks of what I saw there. Having flashbacks, which I talk about in the Mars memoir, how when we were in training for Mars in 1980, Aaron, Dave James completed his study with us of all the life forms that they knew were on the red planet. Mm-hmm. And he says, so ladies and gentlemen, future Mars astronauts, guess who releases the first major work to reveal text and photographs about all these life forms on the red planet? And everybody looks at, Ed, and he marches down marches down the aisle. I was sitting in front of my dad, and he puts his hands out, and he goes, "Ta-da!" Andy does. So when I wrote The Discovery of Life on, my point there is when I wrote The Discovery of Life on Mars in 2008, I forgot that 28 years later, Ed Dames had revealed to me and the class that I would write the breakthrough paper about life forms on Mars.
Wow.
And that was suppressed when I wrote the paper. I would not be able to come forward in 2009 because writing the paper kind of jogged my memory. Then the call from Brett Stillings in 2010 jogged it some more.
Yeah.
The call from Bernie Mendez in 2010, 2011 jogged it some more. The 100 or so Skype calls that I shared with Brett and Bernie in 2010 and 11 and 12,
wow,
and the conferences I did with Bernie in 2012 jogged it some more.
You bet.
And we were able to then come forward as fellow astronauts.
Yeah.
In 2009 to 2013. Now, when I came forward in 2008 with my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, which is really, I call it my landmark paper. It's really just essentially the breakthrough paper of what's on Mars. It wasn't the discovery of life on Mars in the sense that we had already been sending people there since 1964. We've been sending people there via aeronautical repositioning chamber since 1976, 77. And I was going beginning 5 years later in 1981 via ARC. I bring out that paper. Now, bear in mind, somebody briefed my father about in 1968, 69, 70, 71 about my paper, about Martians, about the humanoid being on Tsiolkovsky Ridge being the breakthrough image, about the paper itself. 4 years of gatekeeping by my own father. I finally published that paper, 37 years after my dad let me read it. And NASA employees attacked me.
Really?
They never called me and said, "Okay, sir, what have you found on the red planet? How did you do it?" In fact, I published the specialized technique I use to find those images. I will be publishing that methodology again. I forgot.
Interesting.
But I published the paper, and Ray Villard, the publicity director for the Hubble Space Telescope of NASA, attacked me without calling me, without even reading my paper. He writes, if Basiago is so certain of these little leprechauns he's found on Mars, why doesn't he show any images of them? And I was kind of like, well, Mr. Villard, isn't that what my paper's about? Isn't that what I do in the paper? Show these little humanoids on the red planet? Now, I also found when I did shadow operations with Bill Ryan and Terry Cassidy with Project Camelot in 2011, that when I brought out that paper in 2008, some new gatekeepers, Richard C. Hoagland and his colleague Clark McClellan, were actually mad at me. They were actually volubly angry at me. Why? Because they wanted to bring out those findings about NASA JPL image PIA 10214, because after all, it's a treasure trove of life on Mars. Now, why am I calling Richard C. Hoagland the gatekeeper? Well, what did he do when he showed the face on Mars at Cydonia earlier, back in the 80s? He said he was showing the face on Mars. And we know from my work and that of my 34 fellows in the Mars Anomaly Research Society that, as I said, will be published in about 6 years, 2028. We'll cover each of the 35 major Mars anomalies, 25 who have worked with the Mars Anomaly Research Society, and then 10 independents, 35 in all, including Mr. Hope and Joe Skipper and so forth. Hoagland showed a face on Mars and said, this is the face on Mars that we found. Maybe there's life there. What was that? That was gatekeeping to hide the fact that Mars is covered with artifacts, and it's not covered with life. Life there is actually rather scarce. The humanoid life there lives primarily underground because of the predators on the surface, and the vegetation there is quite scarce. The water there is scarce. The oxygen there is scarce. Mm-hmm. Mars was severely damaged by the solar system catastrophe of 9500 BC. And as I mentioned, the Homo Martis Terrae are basically our cousins up there. They are the descendants of the Earthlings who were trapped there after that disaster. Now, isn't it interesting that Mr. Hoagland was working hand in glove with a former NASA employee, Clark McClellan, and Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy of Project Camelot confirmed that Hoagland and McClellan were angry at me when I brought out my paper. What did they do? Well, if they were truth oriented, if they were actually on a quest for truth, as we have been, would they have stated that I wasn't a real person, but that I was a quote-unquote CIA legend? And would Hoagland for himself and Mr. McClellan of NASA, Hoagland somehow always focusing on how NASA meant never a straight answer, but then never really saying anything very substantive about what was on the moon and Mars and what NASA was hiding. Mm-hmm. And after calling me a CIA legend, Hoagland would then refer to me within two hard parens and quotation marks, double quotation marks, using lowercase for the B in my surname, and just calling me Basiago, like I didn't exist. Well, wait a minute, Mr. Hoagland. When you did that, my information of my name, my date of birth, and my bar membership was listed on a website maintained by the Washington State Bar Association. My degrees from UCLA, Northwestern School of Law at Lewis and Clark College, California Polytechnic State University at San Luis Obispo, and the University of Cambridge were all available from the registrars of that school. Mm-hmm. So weren't you doing something very much like Ray Villard, the publicity director for NASA's Hubble Space Telescope, when he said, if Basiago was so certain of life on Mars, why doesn't he show any pictures of these little leprechauns that he claims are on the red planet? Or some such nonsense. When Hoagland was saying that Basiago was a CIA legend, when there was ample evidence of my existence online that he, for example, has never presented? Okay, so what I'm saying is the gatekeeping of using my dad to brief me about my destiny to go to Mars and then write this landmark paper about life on Mars, then went into this era in which individuals posing as figures sort of in the, not so much the truth, but sort of just the Art Bell listening audience, were actually attacking me for what then the government knew when I was a little kid I would be destined to do. So there had to be some kind of shift, some kind of change. I think that probably it's when the Nixon-Ford-Carter era gave way to the Reagan-Bush Clinton era, and they decided to start spinning or managing through gatekeepers that would be approaching important experiencers to gatekeepers that would be lying about them. So the first effort was sort of journalists, scholars, sort of cultural figures like Hoagland, like Villard, like the three other NASA employees who, in addition to Villard, lied about me. To lie about Mars in the same way that Matt Markovich of ABC Como TV in Seattle lied about my time travel truths. And so we have to look at these figures in the evolving field of exopolitics, if you will, as gatekeepers who were lying about me, Aaron, right when I broke up. seen publicly. In addition to Ray Villard and 3 other NASA employees, I've forgotten their names, and Richard C. Hogan and his colleague Clark McClelland from NASA. And another one would have to be Steve Bassett. Steve Bassett stated the very position that Steve Greer and the founders of exopolitics, Weber, Sala, and Kaplan, have alleged, that he was pro-truth. He was trying to reveal truth about life on other planets, the ones that are coming here. Why then did he go to Weber and every other major figure in exopolitics and say, right when I broke on the scene, this Basiago guy, he's clearly some kind of CIA operative sent to destroy exopolitics. Aaron, do you know that Steve Bassett said that, despite the fact that I edited the seminal work Exopolitics for Weber and wrote the appendix at the end of that work in which I present statements about the ET situation by prominent world citizens, and did so as a protege of a former speechwriter for President Kennedy, Norman Cousins. So in other words, Steve Bassett would be another one of these sort of enhanced gatekeepers, not trying to manage and sort of handle those with important space-related destinies that they just sort of want to manage and control, but literally defame to prevent people from believing what they were sharing.
Yeah, I interviewed Bassett, and I'll never interview him again. You're right. He is a gatekeeper, and he's not a very nice chap. That's what I say.
I mean, I'm sure that there's gatekeeping in a Steve Greer or an Alex Collins saying that all of these ETs coming to Earth are friendly, when the last Pacific Ocean I swam in or scuba dove in had benevolent, neutral, and malevolent creatures like dolphins, sturgeon, and sharks. Why wouldn't outer space? And when we have the evidence of mutilations of humans by ET, such as in the Jonathan P. Lois incident, White Sands Missile Proving Ground in New Mexico, and I think even the Marine House Brazil abduction and
bless you,
mutilation.
Oh my!
Thank you. Dialysis does a number to the throat because you dry out.
I bet.
That's the goal.
Yes. My goodness.
So when I come out editing Weber's book Exopolitics and writing the appendix, where I name all these prominent world citizens who have commented in the positive vein, affirming the existence of visitors to this planet from elsewhere, the very reality of the ET situation. I'm talking about Buzz Aldrin and Prince Philip and everybody. I mean, we're talking about really prominent world citizens. And Bassett's going around exopolitics saying this Basiago guy, he's got to be a CIA operative sent to destroy exopolitics. And he did that when I edited Weber's paper in 2005 and authored that appendix before I even wrote and released The Discovery of Life on Mars in 2008.
Wow.
Well, I did. And then who did I get a call to be on his radio show? Hoagland. Because he read the paper and he thought, this guy can't be working for the intel community, the deep state, the shadow government, the permanent secret government. My definition for the deep state, as I mentioned on a former episode of Quest for Truth, I think the deep state basically is the U.S. intelligence community abusing power. So Hoagland reads my paper from 2008. He must have said, how could this Basiago guy not be for real? He's listed here in the Washington State Bar Association.org website as a Washington State lawyer, just like he claimed. And he's written a paper that NASA clearly would not want released because this is what they've been hiding. This is what I've been talking about on Coast to Coast AM for umpty years. So Hoagland, to his credit, realized that I'm totally for real. In fact, I'm a significant whistleblower who risked his life and maybe even was blinded by coming out from behind the curtain that these intel and military agencies have been using on us since World War II. And there's no way they wanted that stuff released, either Weber's book Exopolitics or my scholarly paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars. So, 2009,
yeah,
I have a total breakthrough on my memories, and I go public with my experiences on the Red Planet in August of that year at a public appearance that I did at the Science and Spirituality Transformation Conference organized by James Gilliland in Trout Lake, Washington, my adopted state.
okay.
And that sets off the sort of new kickstarting of the literature of the secret space program. Because when I come forward in 2009, based on finally having broken through that 25 years of memory suppression that all of us were subjected to by the use by Major Ed Dames and others who were our Mars training officers and handling us at that time, that they were using the American reverse engineered version of a Soviet device known as the Leda machine. Because after all, we were going to Mars before the fall of the Berlin Wall. So this was the reverse engineering of the Soviet Leda machine, Lida, which is some Russian anagram, and I don't even know what they are. But anyway, I come forward in 2009, and what do? I support the earlier claims of Michael C. Rell from 1999 and Arthur Neumann from 2006. And by the way, I would be remiss to not share Mr. Neumann's insistence that he never went there for the CIA, nor did the rest of us. That was a legacy of Weber's misstating that Project Pegasus was DARPA CIA and that it was the CIA Mars jump room program. That was a penchant for always attacking America and the CIA that Weber has for whatever reason. I never said that Project Pegasus was a DARPA CIA project, and I never said that Project Mars was a CIA project. I said that there were some CIA people on it, like Courtney Murray's son, but no. So anyway, I come forward and I affirm Ralph and Neumann, and by the way, in stating that Neumann has always wanted it stated that he did not go up to Mars for the CIA, he claims he went up there for the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory up in Northern California. Now, maybe that's the group that started to put people on the moon. Maybe that's where everybody in the secret space program community should be looking. If we are to believe Neumann, and by the way, Ralph and he certainly got the jump rooms correct, maybe that's a critical linkage that Arthur Neumann provided as the second U.S. astronaut on the Red Planet to come forward, achieved for the literature of the secret space program. I'm not immune to exploring this, Aaron. I'm stating that nobody's spending any time making any linkages that overcome state secrecy and make their claims marginally credible. You're confusing the possibility that some or all these people are telling the truth from something else that I'm calling for. I'm calling for true history, the use of techniques to link things that are not being revealed by world governments and even private interests that may be sending people to space. Remember what Ben Rich of Lockheed Skunk said?
Didn't you say that we now have the technology to bring ET home?
Right. If we factor in what Neumann said with Ben Rich's statement, maybe Lawrence Livermore and other laboratories at the federal and state level are sending people out of the solar system. Maybe the secret space program Rediscovered will lead to a realization that, hey man, it's not just about the solar system. This is the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe all these people are telling the truth, but they're just not engaging in this historical linkage that I'm calling for. I do not want to be held out as a skepticism. I was fighting skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what I was called? Remember what I mentioned about being what happened with ABC Disney, where they stole my stuff and then used it to defame me, saying that I was inspired by science fiction,
mm-hmm.
that Hoagland said I wasn't even a real person, Steve Bassett said I was a CIA operative. I was called all kinds of names, leading to a pattern in which I was accused of atrocities that I would never commit, scarcely think of committing, and never have, and never would. Why? Because I'm a good person. I'm a Christian person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a true blue American who would never do what was claimed. So this pattern of skepticism combined with, in the service of gatekeeping, combined with character assassination is what we have to fight. But that doesn't mean we have to say, oh, a new person is making claims. We have to ipso facto believe them if they're making claims.
Mm-hmm.
That was what the guy who ran into Olympic Stadium in Munich in 1972 did when he put a fake number on a fake running suit and ran into the stadium in front of Frank Shorter, who had just actually won the Olympic decathlon,
mm-hmm.
claiming that he had won the 1972 Olympic gold medal in the decathlon. I believe he went to jail in West Germany for that.
Wow.
That's what we have to avoid in the secret space program. We've already found some people doing that, like Randy Kramer.
You know what I think?
And I've identified facts about others. You know, I mentioned, I think, in the previous episode, that Dr. Sala asked Johann Fritz, the pseudonym used by Will Nutter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Will, you say you earned 2 PhDs from the University of Phoenix, that night school, basically, university. What were your theses in? And he couldn't give him the 2 theses by which he was awarded PhDs. Mm-hmm. And I said, Michael, does that sound to you like a threat to validity, as they would say in social science research, about the claims of Will Nutter, this individual using the pseudonym Johann Fritz? And he said, yeah, Andy, it does. And I said, do you think he's been using the name Johann Fritz to falsely associate himself with the alleged or possible German presence on the Red Planet? And he said, absolutely. Okay. So that historiography, that valid historical research, that's the search for the truth. True history. What Michael Sala is doing by questioning Johann Fritz, this individual whose real name is Will Nutter, long enough to see that, look, if the guy couldn't validate what he got his PhDs in, and was not German, but was using a German name to apparently associate himself with the German thread in the evolving literature of the secret space program, we need to rediscover the secret space program to explore what all of these individuals have been doing, and that we will do next week. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
2009
to 2011.
Just as a side note, I want to just interject this. Instead of calling it the secret space program, we should probably call it the secret space programs, because there's probably many, 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 and a lot of them that don't know about each other. And even when I was working at the dealership, a GM dealership, I found out that all of GM's cars, like the Cadillacs, the Chevys, and the Buicks, they each run independently. They compete against each other. So I think secret space programs might do the same.
Well, I think that it does imply that. I think that we're talking about the overt U.S. space program
mm-hmm.
and covert space programs to follow, if in fact they have.
Right.
Certainly, Project Mars was, and that's why perhaps I have the bias towards the singular mm-hmm. secret space program,
right.
Because that's the one that has been verified.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot find 8 disparate individuals from different parts of the country, different backgrounds, to affirm the same device by which they got from Earth to Mars in minutes, and not be talking about a true secret space program. The reason I cling to that singular usage is that the other claims of multiple involvement, of a Mars Colony Corporation, of visits to the Mars, to the Moon, Mars, and Ceres, and so forth, those claims of a multiplicity of other secret space programs has been asserted, but as we'll explore next week, there's a pattern of deficiencies in those accounts. And I won't name names, I will just identify patterns of alleged experiences as told by roughly everybody since Randy Kramer. Went back and with Dr. Sala's brilliant assistance he's been giving me, just by having me on his podcast about every month or so. Nothing too earth-shaking to others in exopolitics, right? I lost my train of thought. What was we talking about?
So we were on 2009.
Oh yeah. Well, anyway,
James Gilliland, spiritual.
Yeah. Basically, we have the assistance of Sala in asking questions of these secret space programs, experiencers, if you insist that they multiplicity of programs even exist. I'm not willing to admit that yet, or I'm not willing to acknowledge that assertion yet, because of what we're going to be discussing next week about the pattern of missing data among the new claimants. Oh, that's what I see. Through the brilliant help of Dr. Sala, I was able to establish that he interviewed Randy Kramer. That's what we're talking about. In early 2014. So we're really talking about the last 8 years of literature in this area, asserting that there have been a multiplicity of secret space programs. So, for example, Kramer's assertion of the Mars Colony Corporation is not necessarily true. Hence, the alleged involvement of Vice President Cheney has not been verified. Just as Kramer alleged a going-away party by Rumsfeld, and as his ex-wife, Andrea, explained to me, that's because I had described about working with Rumsfeld in Project Pegasus. Just as when they came out of a department store mall one time, probably in Eugene, Oregon, and they couldn't find their car, and Randy Kramer asserted to his new wife that they had teleported because they couldn't find their car. So Dr. Sala recently helped me contextualize the fact that his interview with Randy Kramer took part in early 2014. And he did state that, he would like it known. He didn't ask me to state this to others, but I know he would want it known that he has not managed or handled the public relations careers of these individuals. He's just interviewed them.
Right.
He's a scholar like Weber and Kasten, who has interviewed people and broadcast or written down what they've said. He's done 15 books and 1,000 articles, and has a major podcast. And hence, I think the mantle of leadership in exopolitics is firmly on his shoulders at this point. And he acknowledged to me that he did have issues regarding the credibility of Randy Kramer. So that's one of the patterns we're going to be discussing next week, is the need of new claimants to always reify Randy rather than Andy. Let's explore what that might mean next week, okay? Anyway, 2009, I come forward publicly. I affirm the apparent true history of Relfin Neumann, and I then bring forward 4 colleagues, not 4 claimants, 4 comrades, 4 people I worked with, 4 people who, like I, stating publicly that they were my colleagues on Mars, they in the opposite direction were saying Andy was one of my colleagues on the Red Planet. And then, of course, in the case of Stillings and Mendez, they talked about being trained with me from Mars. In the case of William Whitecrow, he talked about also working with me on Project Pegasus and then endorsed me for president in 2016. Mm-hmm. And then either died or his death was falsified, or he was not killed. Mm-hmm. And then I worked with Dr. Johnston, and he also affirmed our time together on the Red Planet, although I wasn't trained with Ken. He was from NASA. Mm-hmm. He came from a different direction in serving at Project Mars. Now, just as Major Dames did, when Major Dames trained us in August and September of 1980 at College of the Siskiyous in Northern California, as his website biography used to state, at that time he was, guess what, a scientific and technical intelligence officer for the U.S. Army. Now, I would ask all those who are asserting they were in the secret space program, have you ever stated who trained you for other planets? Those who came forward originally, 4 of them talked about being trained by somebody who publicly stated that he was a scientific and technical intelligence officer for the U.S. Army in the early 80s. If you're going to be sending American young people in their mid to late teens and early 20s to Mars, are you going to use a scientific and technical intelligence officer from the Army? You betcha, because what does the Army have control over? The land. What does the Navy have control over? The time horizon, the oceans, beyond the time horizons beyond the horizon of the ocean, and hence time travel. So in other words, the website of Major Ed Dames himself helps establish the truth of the post-2009 assertions of Basiago, Stillings, Mendez, and
Stillings
and Whitecrow about the involvement of Dames and being trained to go there, and then partnering up on the Red Planet. Because as I mentioned, again, Ken Johnston came from NASA, a background working with NASA.
Right.
Okay, so that basically occupied a good part of 2009 to 2011. I began to Skype those two. We helped get around each other's, or all 3 of our memory blocks. We began to do conferences like I had done Joan Ocean's conference in Hawaii in 2011, and then Brett and Bernie were invited there in 2013, but begged off. Bernie did do an appearance in Vancouver, BC with me. He did come to the conference, the first UFO con that Lorian Fenton did in Santa Clara, California in 2012. So that was a very rich period. Now that Ralph, Neumann, Basiago, Stillings, Mendez, Whitecrow, and Johnson have come forward, 7 U.S. astronauts, and then the deep state, the U.S. intelligence community abusing power, saw in 2011 astronaut Basiago bring astronaut Stillings and the great-granddaughter of President Eisenhower, Laura Eisenhower, who was invited to go to Mars but begged off, chose not to go. But nonetheless, when I brought myself, Stillings, and Eisenhower onto Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, I checked the date on that recently, November 10th of 2011, Aaron, the deep state must have been doing back then. Oh, great. 7 U.S. astronauts who were on the Red Planet, and the great-granddaughter of a president who was offered the opportunity to go there but decided not to be sent to Mars. What are we going to do now? So I think what happened, as after November of 2011 into that 2012 period, and by the way, when that UFO con was held in Santa Clara in 2012, 4 principals were given serious vision problems.
Wow.
Myself, Alfred L. Weber, Sean D. Morton, and Lorian Fenton.
Wow.
the host of the conference, Lorian Fenton, the MC, Sean David Morton, and then arguably the two primary guests of about 10 speakers, which was Weber and myself. Isn't it curious when four individuals from different backgrounds of different accomplishments within exopolitics, all of them laudable, all of them touching upon visitations to this planet by the ET, something the U.S. government has been covering up for over 70 years, 75 years since Roswell. Developed vision loss after being in the same continent.
Wow.
This is the true history of the secret space program. The true history of the secret space program is that I and my fellows who were actually in it, or who are true historians seeking to further the telling of the truth, were blinded. Next week, we'll talk about the fact that in the false thread, there's never any consequence to coming forward.
Right.
No death, like we experienced with William Whitecrow. No injury, as we've experienced with Basiago, Stillings, Mendez, and Johnston. No blindness, as was experienced by Basiago, Weber, Benton, and Morton, and so forth.
Wow.
So 2013, 2014, particularly as I mentioned, with Dr. Sala's efforts just to report on what Randy Kramer was saying in early 2014, but then not really do anything to promote the clue of Randy Kramer. Kind of set off a wave of a new kind of gatekeeping. In that gatekeeping, it wasn't gatekeeping by somebody within the defense, intelligence / military apparatus, if you will, like my dad, to work with a child to prepare for a space-related destiny. Even putting up posters of NASA pros on my bedroom wall when I was a kid. Then the second wave of gatekeeping, the Ray Villard, Richard C. Hoagland, Clark McClellan approach of character assassination of somebody talking about too much, into a third wave of gatekeeping of alleged experiencers. They thought, well, can we really knock down these 8 people with that second group of gatekeepers? I mean, we can have a Ray Villard, a Richard Hoagland, a Clark McClellan, a Bill Ryan, whoever, character assassinate, Torrey Smith, character assassinate Andy and the 7 others until the cows come home, but it's not going to work. So, gentlemen, ladies, what are we going to do? And I think what they decided to do was put forward a third type of gatekeeper, not a kind of an insider coach like my dad, not a journalist, scholar, character assassination like Villard, Hoagland, McClellan, Ryan, etc., but essentially alleged experiencers who would just sort of muddy the water about what the true experiencers were sharing. Because what can you do when you've got the internet and you've got true experiencers sharing dozens and dozens and even ultimately hundreds of facts about the secret space program? You flood the field with false claims. What else can you do besides assassinate all of them? Sure, they can kill one of them, William Whitecrow, because he was violating his U.S. Army secrecy oath, and he had been a participant on Project Omega, which is the secret U.S. Army program that uses the top 1% of U.S. Army officers to establish a sort of Maginot Line, or protective line, around every downed UFO, whether it's just landed or crashed, with orders to shoot to kill any human being from Earth, humanoid from outer space, or even animal from Earth or animal from space that leaves the extraterrestrial craft and falls between the craft and their protective echelon or Maginot Line. And that's perhaps why White Crow was killed, if in fact he was killed. But they must have said, well, we can't kill these other 7 people. It's going to make us go right to the cover of Time magazine. Secret space program claimant did.
Yeah.
Right there on the cover of the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Times of London. They could not do that. So they did it to White Crow, but they flooded the field. And of course, White Crow being the principal military officer on both Project Pegasus and Project Mars, perhaps that's why they got rid of him. But what they've done with the rest of us is they have confused everybody by, for example, having agent provocateurs ask me regarding Pegasus, tell me about the teleportation, Andy. And then over and over and over again, I've talked about the 8 modalities of time travel involved in Project Pegasus. Mm-hmm. In the case of Project Mars, I've talked about the secret space program to the Red Planet, but people have come along talking about these other secret space programs. Not done by the U.S., but done by the Mars Colony Corporation or another billionaire, not Hughes, mm-hmm. et cetera, et cetera. So I think what's happening, and I think I'm going to be proven right on this, and that's why I'm not going to be naming names anymore. I think that's basically the tactique. You know, the salami tactique is, or tactic as it's also known, as one slice at a time, right?
Okay.
The inundation technique of disinformation is flood the field with made-up stuff, with made-up claims. And I'm kind of surprised that people our age aren't aware of that reality in America after watching 60 Minutes for 50 years, so that they're not even asking with some incredulity about the valor of a lot of our political leaders. They are valorizing individuals who have already demonstrably demonstrated their lack of, let's just say their lack of perfection, their lack of honor, and they're still always pulling for their guy. And I think in a similar way, when people are imaginatively enthused, when their sort of Star Trek-y kind of imagination gets growth by one of these false claimants, they become a devotee of that claimant. But they don't have any desire to apply true history to those claimants any more than they're asking questions about their favorite politician. Okay? It's a kind of a pattern in our country to lack discernment by not asking the questions that a mature, reasonable adult can practice. Not being a skepticist, but being a responsible student of true history.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, that
Yes,
closes tonight's podcast.
Okay.
What we're doing is looking at the Secret Space Program under the title The Secret Space Program Rediscovery. And I think I've just told sort of the early years of how I was being sort of handled by a gatekeeper that was my own father, somebody within the government who was preparing me for a role in the space program. That's where we were going. Mm-hmm. In other words, I honor my great late father with the fact that he was implementing the will of the American people. He was trying to set me up to play a role in implementing the will of the American people as expressed through the congressional legislative mandate of the space agency being founded primarily to expand human knowledge of space and the near-Earth environment.
Yeah.
And then into the Reagan, into sort of the Carter, the Ford. Well, let's see. I guess it was Nixon, Ford, Carter. I mentioned that. I guess it was Reagan, Bush, Clinton. Into the Reagan, Bush, Clinton years, I think they said we cannot do what was planned back in the 1960s and 70s. The public is still not ready to be told the truth that we've been on Mars since 1964. They're still not ready to be told the truth that we didn't go back to the moon in 1972 because our EPCs occupiers literally instructed us that if we knew it was good for us, that we wouldn't go back to the moon, and did so by taking over the telecom equipment on Apollo 17. So into the Reagan, Bush, Clinton sort of years, they came up with this sort of gatekeeper thing with the Ray Ballards and the Hoaglunds and the McClellans, who are essentially tied to NASA. That's my conclusion. And, for example, nobody ever asked, well, how does Hoagland get all this information about NASA? And why, when he does so, does he never really talk about anything substantive? Why would McClellan have gone along with Hoagland's decision to claim that Andy was a CIA legend and not even a real person when he came out with all this valuable information and he was identified as himself, his date of birth, his address, and everything on the internet? And so you have to ask, who were they working for? And then after all these people came forward who did go, who were in the actual secret space program, then what did they have left? They had the politics of assassination, the politics of character assassination, and then let's call it the politics of factual inundation. And with that thought, I'm happy to report that is the conclusion of tonight's The Quest for Truth.
Thank you, Andy, and good night, everybody. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Good night.
Good night, Aaron.
Good night. And thank you, everybody. And that was live. That was Andy on the phone. And we'll be back on the 28th. So we'll see you then. Or Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Peace in. We'll talk to you later.